There is a phrase carved into the ancient stone of the temple of Apollo at Delphi. It reads, "Know thyself." These two simple words, though easy to repeat, hold the weight of centuries of philosophical thought. They were so important that Socrates himself made them the foundation of his entire philosophy. Know thyself, he said, or be a slave. But what does that mean? What does it mean to know yourself, and how could the absence of this knowledge make you a slave? Socrates was not interested in knowledge for the sake of mere curiosity. He believed that true wisdom begins when we admit that we know nothing. And from this humble starting point, we begin to ask questions, not just about the world around us, but about the world within us. Who am I? What do I believe? Why do I act the way I do? What drives me? These are not easy questions. They are not solved in a day or even in a lifetime. But Socrates believed that the unexamined life, the life that does not ask such questions, is not worth living. To understand why, we must think carefully about what happens when we do not know ourselves. When we don't understand our emotions, our desires, our fears, we become reactive. Someone says something that offends us and we lash out. A desire arises and we chase it blindly. A fear appears and we shrink away. In all these cases, we are not in control. We are not choosing our actions. We are being pulled by forces we don't understand. And that, Socrates says, is a kind of slavery. You see, there is more than one kind of chain. Some chains are made of iron and are fastened around the body, but others are invisible and lie hidden in the mind. The chain of addiction, the chain of pride, the chain of fear, the chain of trying to please everyone, the chain of needing approval, the chain of not knowing your own worth. These are not chains we wear on our hands, but they bind us just the same. And Socrates knew that the only way to break such chains is through inner awareness. Know thyself means more than simply being aware of your name or your job or your favorite color. It means becoming deeply familiar with your soul, with what you value, with what drives you, with what pains you. It means looking at your thoughts as they arise and asking, where did this come from? Is this belief mine, or was it planted there by others? Is this desire leading me to freedom, or am I walking into another trap? For most people, the idea of stopping to reflect is uncomfortable. We are trained to look outward, to watch the news, to scroll through social media, to focus on success, appearance, and status. But very few are taught to pause and ask, who am I beneath all of this? What do I truly believe? What matters to me when no one is watching? This is why Socrates was feared. This is why he was hated by many in Athens. He didn't teach people to conform or to succeed in the eyes of others. He taught them to ask questions, to strip away illusion, to face themselves. And this was threatening because once a person begins to question everything, they stop being easy to control. Socrates believed that most people live under illusions. Illusions about what success is, illusions about what makes them happy, illusions about what's right and wrong. And if you live under illusion, you are not free. You are being led by media, by culture, by fear, by habit. You may think you are choosing your path, but you are not. You are being steered. This is why he said, know thyself or be a slave. This message is especially important today. In the modern world, distractions are endless. You can go years, decades even, without ever sitting in silence and asking yourself what you really want, what really matters. You can live a life chasing money, approval, pleasure, popularity, and never stop to ask, Is this truly me? Or am I just playing a role I've been taught to play? Many people think freedom means doing whatever you want. But Socrates flips this idea on its head. He says true freedom comes not from following every desire, but from understanding desire, from being able to choose your response rather than being a puppet of impulse. If a man is angry and hits someone, he is not free. He is a slave to anger. If a woman sees someone else's success and feels jealous, she is not free. She is a slave to comparison. If a person cannot sit alone without scrolling through their phone, they are not free. They are a slave to distraction. Only when we begin to see these chains can we start to break them. But this process is not easy. Socrates was not an entertainer. He was not interested in comfort. He compared himself to a gadfly, a small insect that bites and stings a lazy horse to wake it up. And that was his role, to sting people awake, to disturb their comfort, to make them think. And in doing so, he believed he was performing a divine duty. So let us return to the temple at Delphi. The words are still there. Know thyself. It is not a command filled with force. It is an invitation to wake up, to turn inward, to stop blaming the world and start questioning the self, to become curious about your own mind, and in doing so, to reclaim your power. Socrates believed that knowledge of self leads to virtue, because once you see yourself clearly, you begin to see others clearly too. You begin to act not from fear or greed or ego, but from truth. You begin to speak with purpose. You begin to walk with intention, and that is a life of freedom. It starts with the courage to ask uncomfortable questions. Why do I believe what I believe? Who taught me this? Is it true? What am I avoiding? What am I running from? What pain have I buried so deeply that I no longer feel it, but it still controls me? These are the questions of philosophy. They are not easy, but they are necessary. Because if you do not ask these questions, someone else will answer them for you. If you do not decide who you are, the world will decide for you. And it will usually decide wrong. It will tell you that your worth depends on your status, that your value depends on how you look, that happiness is found in buying things. That truth is what the crowd agrees with. And if you follow all of that without question, you are no longer a person, you are a product, you are a slave. Socrates lived a life of questioning. He had no money, no status, and no fear of death. He walked the streets of Athens talking to anyone who would listen, and many who didn't want to. He asked hard questions. He challenged powerful people. He turned pride into confusion, and in the end, they sentenced him to death. But even in prison, he was free. Even while drinking poison, he remained calm, because he had already done the hard work. He had already faced himself. He had already found truth, not in books, not in reputation, but within. And that is the invitation for all of us. To stop chasing and start listening. To stop pretending and start reflecting. To stop being busy and start being still. Because in that stillness, we begin to hear a different voice. Not the voice of the world, but the quiet voice of the soul. That voice is soft. It does not shout. But if you listen long enough, it begins to guide you. It begins to show you what is true. It begins to set you free. So I ask you, have you truly looked within? Do you know yourself? Or are you still wearing the chains? Let us begin again with stillness. Because in stillness, something sacred happens. The mind begins to settle. The noise of the world grows dim. And if you listen carefully, you might start to hear something deeper. Something beneath your usual thoughts. That deeper awareness is the beginning of self-knowledge. Socrates did not just teach people to think. He taught them to observe their assumptions, their judgments, their habits, their reactions. Because what we call personality is often just repetition. We think we are choosing, but really we are following patterns. These patterns come from childhood, from society, from trauma, from experience, but very rarely do they come from conscious choice. To know yourself, you must become an observer of your own inner world. You must ask, why do I always react this way? Why does this word hurt me? Why do I fear being alone? Why do I need others to validate me? These questions require more than logic. They require honesty, and honesty, real honesty, is rare because it hurts, it humbles. It shows us how often we lie to ourselves. But without this honesty, there is no freedom. A man who lies to himself is in a prison. He may walk freely in the world, but inside he is bound by illusion. He avoids what is uncomfortable. He distracts himself from his pain. He blames others for his suffering, and slowly he forgets who he is. He becomes a mask, a performance, a persona. Socrates warned against this. He warned against living a life that looks successful on the outside but is empty within. And this message is more relevant now than ever before. Today we are taught to curate our lives, to present an image, to seek likes, followers, approval, but in doing so, we drift further and further from who we really are. To know yourself, you must be willing to be alone, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. You must be willing to sit with discomfort, to sit with questions that have no quick answers. Who am I when there is no one to impress? Who am I when everything is stripped away? My job, my reputation, my relationships. Can I still look in the mirror and say, I know this person? Philosophy teaches us that the soul is like a garden. If you do not tend to it, weeds will grow. The weeds are automatic thoughts, unconscious beliefs, inherited fears. And if you never examine them, they take over. You start believing things you never questioned. You start living a life that was never yours. Socrates was not against society, but he was against blind obedience. He was against the idea that just because something is common, it must be good. He believed that each person has a duty, a sacred task, to question the world around them and to question themselves. And this questioning is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of reverence. Reverence for truth, reverence for the soul. When Socrates said, know thyself or be a slave, he wasn't speaking in metaphor. He meant it literally. If you don't know what you value, someone else will decide your values. If you don't know what you believe, you'll believe whatever is popular. If you don't know who you are, you'll become whoever the world tells you to be. This kind of slavery is subtle. It doesn't come with chains. It comes with comfort. It comes with fitting in. It comes with never questioning. But in the end, it leads to a life of quiet desperation. A life where you feel something is missing, but you don't know what. A life where you keep chasing, but never arrive. That is why Socrates pushed people to discomfort. He knew that pain often leads to clarity. When we suffer, we are forced to look within. When we lose something, we begin to ask what really matters. When we are rejected, we are given a chance to define ourselves apart from approval. But many people avoid this pain. They numb it with food, with entertainment, with busyness, with noise. And in doing so, they avoid the very path that could set them free. To know yourself, you must be courageous. Courageous enough to admit when you're wrong. Courageous enough to sit with your wounds. Courageous enough to forgive yourself for your past. Socrates did not offer easy answers. He offered questions because he knew that every soul must walk its own path. No teacher, no guru, no book can walk it for you. There is no shortcut to knowing yourself. It is not found in a quote. It is not found in a single moment. It is a process, a daily practice, a way of being. You must wake up each day and look within. You must examine your motives, your emotions, your choices, not to judge them, but to understand them. Understanding leads to mastery. If you understand your anger, you no longer lash out. If you understand your fear, you no longer run from it. If you understand your desire, you no longer chase blindly. You become still, you become calm. And in that calm, you make choices from clarity, not from chaos. This is what Socrates meant by freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to choose your inner state, the freedom to remain centered in a storm, the freedom to say no when others expect yes, the freedom to live with integrity even when it costs you, and yes, it will cost you. Knowing yourself is not always pleasant. It may cost you your old identity, your old friends, your comforts. It may break your illusions. But what you gain is priceless. You gain truth, you gain peace, you gain strength that no one can take from you. In a world that tells you to be everything, Socrates invites you to be yourself. Not the self shaped by culture, but the self that existed before the world told you who to be. That self is quiet, that self is deep, that self is waiting. But you must go and find it. You must be willing to enter the silence. You must be willing to walk through your fears. You must be willing to shed everything false. And what is left, what remains after all the illusions fall away, is something unshakable, something eternal, the soul. So how do we begin? We begin by noticing. We begin by paying attention to our thoughts, our emotions, our reactions. We begin by asking, is this true? Is this mine? Or did I borrow it from someone else? We begin by practicing silence, not just outer silence, but inner quiet. Meditation is one path. Journaling is another. Honest conversation with a wise friend is another. But the method matters less than the sincerity. You must truly want to know yourself, not just so you can be better, but so you can be free. Because without this inner knowledge, we are always reacting, always defending, always running, always seeking something, approval, success, happiness, but never finding it, because we are looking in the wrong place. The truth, Socrates believed, is already within you. But you must dig. You must peel away the layers. You must endure the discomfort of the search. And if you do, you will find something the world cannot give you and cannot take away. That is the gift of philosophy. It does not give you answers. It gives you the tools to seek them. It does not promise comfort. It promises clarity. It does not make life easier. It makes life deeper. So ask yourself in this very moment, who am I? Not your name, not your job, not your role. Who are you when there is nothing left to prove? Who are you when you are no longer afraid? Who are you when you are no longer performing? That self, that silent witness, that deeper awareness is where freedom lives. Know it, or remain a slave. Let us take a moment to breathe. Inhale deeply and exhale slowly. This breath, this quiet moment, this pause in the noise, it is a doorway into the self. We live in an age that moves fast. Everything is urgent, everything is loud, but the soul, your true self, speaks quietly. If you are always rushing, always reacting, always distracted, you will miss its voice. That is why Socrates told us to stop, to reflect, to ask, to listen. Know thyself or be a slave. This is not a threat. It is not a punishment. It is a reality. If you do not know yourself, the world will define you. And the world's definition is not designed to set you free. The world will tell you, you are your appearance, you are your income, you are your title, you are your popularity, and many people believe this. They chase beauty, wealth, power, followers. But all of these are temporary. All of them can be taken away. So what happens when they are? What happens when you grow older and beauty fades? What happens when you lose your job? What happens when people stop clapping? If your sense of self depends on these things, then you are not free. You are owned by circumstance. You are a slave to approval, to performance, to image. But Socrates invites you to build your identity on something deeper, on truth, on awareness, on essence. To know yourself is to root your identity in what cannot be taken. And what is that? It is your character. It is your conscience. It is your ability to choose truth even when it costs you. It is your ability to act with love even when you are not loved in return. It is your ability to be still even when the world is loud. That is who you are, not the mask, but the source behind it. And yet knowing yourself is not a one-time event. It is not a box you check. It is a lifelong relationship. Just as you grow and change, your understanding of self must also deepen. New layers are revealed, new shadows appear, new wisdom is discovered, but only if you keep asking. Only if you remain humble, because humility is essential. Socrates himself said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." This is not self-deprecation, it is self-awareness. It is the recognition that truth is vast and the ego is small. When you think you know everything, you stop listening. When you stop listening, you stop learning. When you stop learning, you become rigid, defensive, trapped. But when you admit what you don't know, something beautiful happens. You open, you soften, you become curious. And curiosity is the spark of all growth. So many of our problems, personal, political, social, stem from a lack of self-knowledge. When people do not know themselves, they project, they blame, they react, they attack, they follow the herd, they believe lies, they cling to ideology, and they suffer. The path Socrates offers is harder, but it leads to peace. To look within is to take responsibility, not for everything that happens to you, but for how you respond. Not for your past, but for your choices now. Not for the world, but for your inner world. And this shift from blame to responsibility is the beginning of true power. Think about this. How often do we say things like, "He made me angry," or "She made me feel small," or "Life is unfair"? These phrases place our experience in the hands of others. We become victims of circumstance. But Socrates would challenge that. He would ask, did they make you angry? Or did you respond with anger? Did she make you feel small, or did you believe her words? Is life unfair, or are you resisting its reality? These questions are not meant to shame, they are meant to wake you up. Because as long as your emotions, your peace, your identity depend on something outside you, you will never be free. Freedom begins when you take your power back. And that power lives in awareness. When you know your triggers, you don't get trapped in them. When you know your wounds, you don't pass them on. When you know your values, you don't betray them for approval. When you know your truth, you don't sell it for comfort. But to reach this level of clarity, you must be willing to go deep. You must be willing to look at your pain, not to drown in it, but to understand it. You must be willing to revisit your past, not to relive it, but to release it. You must be willing to challenge your beliefs, not to destroy them, but to refine them. Socrates believed that every human soul contains truth. But that truth is often buried under trauma, buried under fear, buried under noise. Philosophy is the tool that helps us dig. It is not a set of answers. It is a method, a practice, a lens through which we examine ourselves and the world. And through that examination, we grow. You might wonder what happens when I begin to know myself. You might feel more alone because you no longer fit into roles that used to define you. You might feel more uncertain because old beliefs begin to dissolve. You might feel more quiet because there is less to prove.